The lawyer had been reading for 20 minutes, the house, the cars, the accounts, one name after another, when the son raised his hand and asked him to go back and read the part about the housekeeper out loud. "So she hears it properly," he said, and turned in his chair to look at me by the door. I was standing where I always stood, at the edge of the study, a tray of coffee going cold in my hands. 11 years I had worked in that house. 11 years I had carried a tray into that exact room and set it down without a sound. The lawyer found the line and read it. "And to the woman who kept the house, nothing." The son smiled at his sister across their mother's desk. What neither of them knew, smiling at each other like that, was that the lawyer had not yet reached the bottom of the page. I came to that house at 43, the year the plant closed and my marriage closed with it, in the same gray month. The agency sent me for a 2-week trial. I stayed 11 years. The work was the work, and I have never been ashamed of it. I scrubbed floors that were already clean, because clean was not the standard, spotless was. I ironed sheets no guest would ever see. I learned which stair creaked, and how to carry a full tray up it in the dark, so that upstairs no one would wake. The family called me the help when they called me anything at all. In 11 years the son never once used my name. To him I was a fixture in the hallway, like the coat rack, noticed only on the rare occasion something was out of its place. The people who count the silver are never the ones who polish it. I polished that silver for 11 years. I could have told you the story of every piece, which was a wedding gift, which came from the mother she never spoke of. They could not have told you a single thing about me. They never once asked. Here is the part the family never understood, because they were almost never in the room to see it. The old woman lived in that enormous house alone. Her children visited the way people visit a bank, quickly, with a purpose, counting something on the way out. A birthday lunch. A signature needed. A Christmas that ended by 4 o'clock, coats already on. I was the one who was there. I brought her tea at the hour she liked it, too strong, the way she pretended the doctor allowed. I read to her in the afternoons when her eyes tired, the same 3 novels over and over, because those were the ones her own mother had read to her. She was not a soft woman. The first year, she found fault with everything, testing whether I would flinch. I did not flinch. I had already lost the 2 things I thought I couldn't live without, and I found that made me very hard to frighten. Somewhere in the second year she stopped testing me, and something else began. We played cards most evenings. She cheated, shamelessly, and dared me with her eyes to say so. I never did. It was the only game she still won, and I saw no reason to take it from her. She told me things in those evenings that I do not think she ever told her children. That she had been frightened her whole married life and hidden it under money. That she knew exactly what her son thought of her, that he was waiting, politely, for a date on a calendar. "You're the only one who comes to see me," she said once, laying down a card she had no business holding. "Everyone else comes to see the will." I told her not to talk like that. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "I'm old, dear. I'm not blind." And she was neither. The last winter, she got small. That is the word for it. The big voice went quiet, and the sharp woman folded down into someone who held my hand in the night and was not too proud, anymore, to say she was afraid. I did not do it for money. I want that understood, because everyone who hears this story assumes there must have been a plan. There was no plan. I did it because at some point in 11 years she had stopped being my employer and become the person I loved most in the world, and I had somehow become the same to her, and neither of us had any other word for it than the cards at the kitchen table. One afternoon near the end she asked me to bring her the writing box, and her good pen, and to leave her alone for an hour, the only hour of privacy she asked me for in a year. I heard her writing. I did not ask what. I brought her tea when the hour was up, and she had that look she got when she'd beaten me at a hand I thought I'd won. "You'll be all right," she said. Not a question. I thought it was just a kind thing an old woman says. It was, I would learn, the closest she ever came to telling me what she'd done. She died on a Thursday, with her hand in mine, in the clean house. I closed her eyes myself. The son arrived 4 hours later and asked, before his coat was off, when the reading of the will would be. They gathered 9 days later in the study, in the leather chairs, the son and the daughter and their grown children who had visited even less than their parents. Someone asked me to bring coffee, and so I did, and then I simply had nowhere to go, so I stood by the door with the tray, the way I had stood in that house for 11 years. They did not ask me to sit. It did not occur to them that I might. The lawyer read. The house to be sold, the proceeds divided. The accounts, the shares, the car she never drove. And with each line I watched their faces do arithmetic, watched the daughter's mouth tighten every time the split was named, watched the son already spending his half on something. Then the son had his idea. He looked at me, and he had that little smile, and he asked the lawyer to read the part about the housekeeper out loud, so the woman would hear it properly. The lawyer hesitated. I saw him hesitate. Then he read it, because he had been asked. And to the woman who kept the house, nothing. A small silence. Then the daughter laughed, once, through her nose, and said, well. Mother always did know the value of things. 11 years. I did not put the tray down. I held it, because my hands needed something to do, and I looked at a point on the far wall, and I told myself it did not matter what strangers thought of me in a room where the only person who had ever seen me was gone. Actually, the lawyer said, since you've asked me to read that section aloud, I should read all of it. There's a codicil. She added it herself, in her own hand, 3 months ago. He turned the page over. The son's smile stayed on his face a moment too long, the way a smile does when the person wearing it has stopped understanding why. The lawyer read, the line above was written by my children, in their hearts, long before I wrote anything down. So I have left it standing, exactly as they expect it. Now here is mine. To the woman who kept my house, who was not the help, but the only company I had, I leave this house entire, and the account I kept in my own name that my children never troubled to ask about. Not as wages. Wages I paid her. This is the other thing. This is for the 11 years none of them were here. The room did not make a sound. I heard the coffee cups I had poured going cold on the tray in my own hands. I have thought a great deal about their faces in that half second, because it was the last honest thing that family ever showed me. The daughter's laugh was still half on her lips, and it curdled there. I watched it turn from contempt into calculation into something close to fear, all without her mouth moving. The son stood up, then didn't know why he'd stood, and sat back down. One of the grandchildren said, wait, to no one. The son found his voice first, the way his kind always does. This is absurd. She was confused. She was an old, sick woman being managed. He turned to me, and for the first time in 11 years he used a word for me that wasn't the help. He called me a thief. I set the tray down at last, on the table by the door, very gently, the way I set everything down in that house. And I said the only thing I said in that whole room. She beat me at cards the night before she wrote that. She was never confused a day in her life. You just never sat long enough to notice. There is no arithmetic for a sentence like that. I watched them try, and fail, and reach instead for their phones and their lawyers, and I understood that the recalculating would go on for years, in courtrooms, and that I did not have to be in the room for any of it. The lawyer waited for the shouting to run out of air. Then he said there was one more thing, addressed to me, and not to them, a letter, to be read aloud, so she hears it properly. I do not think he chose those words by accident. It was short. She was not a sentimental woman, and even now she wouldn't waste words. He read, you will want to give it back, to prove you didn't do it for this. Don't. I know why you stayed, and it wasn't for a house. That's exactly why the house is yours. Take it. Sell it, burn it, live in it, I don't care. I only wanted, one time, for the last word in this family to belong to the person who was actually kind. And under it, in the hand I'd watched go shaky over that last winter, one line more. Thank you for the tea. It was always too strong. It was always perfect. I did not cry in that study. I would not give them that. I cried later, in the kitchen, at the table where we'd played cards, over a cup I made too strong on purpose. People expect the ending to be the money. It isn't. I sold the house. In the end, I could no more have lived in it than lived inside a grief, and I gave a good part of what it fetched to a home for old people no one visits, in her name, the name I'm not allowed to say here but say every day myself. The family fought the will for 2 years and lost, because a woman who cheats at cards into her 90s does not write a confused codicil, and 3 doctors said so. I did not attend. I sent my lawyer. I had learned, from the best, the dignity of not being in the room. I kept exactly 2 things from that house. The letter. And the pack of cards, still missing the queen she used to palm and grin about. I framed neither. Some things you keep in a drawer, so that keeping them stays private, the way the best things between 2 people always were. They looked straight through me for 11 years, all of them, certain that a woman with a tray in her hands could not possibly be someone who mattered. They were counting the silver the whole time. They never once thought to count me.
People ask if it felt like winning, the will, their faces, all of it.
No. Winning would have meant she was still here to deal the next hand. But I'll tell you what I learned, standing at that door with a tray going cold in my hands. You can be invisible to an entire family and still be the most seen person in the house, as long as one pair of eyes, somewhere, refuses to look away. If there is someone the world keeps looking straight through, and you are the only one who sees them, sit down. Play the cards. Bring the tea too strong. One day the reading comes, and it turns out the quiet ones were keeping score all along. What did being underestimated cost you? And who was the one person who saw you anyway? I read every story here. The best ones become episodes.